Good morning, thanks for joining me. This is Jessie, and this is my channel, The Caffeinated Bookworm. The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee. This book was a book that was chosen for the book club at work. It's got a lot of cute quotations, quotes that you can take with you. Like the monkeys of mischief have been eavesdropping on my worries, and who knew so many moments could happen in the span of one day. A lot of little life lessons thrown in. It's a good book. It really is. So Jo Kwon and her father, Old Jen, are living in it's the basement, but it's not the basement. From what I understand, it's not the basement in the terms that we think of, like it's not directly into the house. It's an old house where they had like an underground place, and like they had the pipe that led up to the house that you could eavesdrop in the house. The word is escaping me at the moment, but it was meant for a family to help. I believe it was freed slaves or runaway slaves hide. And that eavesdropping pipe was so that they could hear if somebody was coming for them. Well, Jo Kwon and her father, Old Jen, are living down there, which is, the basement is actually under a barn. And so the thing is that unlike in earlier times, the people who live in the main house have no idea that they're there. Okay, so in the main house you have the Bells, you have the father who runs a newspaper, the mother, and then you have the son Nathan, who is, I guess, kind of training to take over the newspaper. He is the reporter. The father seems to be gone quite often. At the beginning, Jo is working at a milliner. She decorates hats, she makes hats, she fixes hats. Women of high society bring their hats in, and she'll make little decorations with satin knots, which is an art that she learned from Old Jen and who she refers to as her uncles, who are men that kind of pass in and out of Old Jen's life. And she loves it. She has aspirations of becoming a well-known milliner, with her name, well known for what she does with hats. And then the woman who runs the hat shop, Mrs. English, lets her go. And Jo was just about to ask for a raise because Old Jen is sick and she's worried about him, and she wants to get him some medicine that they sell at Box Bombs. I forget the name of the medicine at the moment. It's a really long name, but it's supposed to be a cure-all. And Box Bombs stands behind their merchandise. And her friend Robbie has recently been presented with the opportunity to potentially work at Box Bombs also as a clerk, which is not. They don't have high hopes. Well, she has high hopes for it. I don't think Robbie has as high hopes for it as Jo does, because Robbie is black, and at that moment, Box Bombs, and really no retailers have been hiring black people for these positions. And so but Joe's certain he's gonna get it, because Robbie he's dressed well and he presents himself well, and he's just, you know, an all-around, like, I think the word is affable, maybe. You know, people are drawn to him. I have to go look that word up. And so she's let go, and she asked Mrs. English why she's let go, and Mrs. English tells her, "You make the customers uncomfortable." And she was like, "Why? What are you talking about?" And Mrs. English tells her that the Chinese sauce box that she is, which is basically telling her that she has too loud opinions for a Chinese girl, that they make the customers uncomfortable. And as far as Jo knows, you know, like, you know, she doesn't sauce off, I guess, to people who she knows are going to be offended by it. You know, she does give her opinion sometimes, and her opinion isn't, you know, what the term sauce box would suggest. You know, it's not like, you know, she's going off, you know, with a whole monologue of opinions. You know, she will tell people that that hat doesn't necessarily go good with your skin color. That color doesn't suit you well. The shape of the hat doesn't suit the shape of your face. And so she thought she was doing the customers a service by giving her opinion, which, as she has come to find out, was not appreciated by some of the customers. However, that day, because Mrs. English tells her to finish out her shift since she's already there, that day, Mrs. Bell comes into the milliner's, the hat shop, and Joe kind of freezes, and Mrs. Bell tells Mrs. English that she's been sent to look for the Chinese girl who does the beautiful satin knot work, because she saw one of her friends with some knot work that Joe had done, and she would like her to do it also. And so Joe's like, yeah, I can do it. And at this point, she's kind of freaking out because she doesn't know whether or not Mrs. Bell knows that she lives in her basement. And Mrs. English at that point is like, no, you don't have time, you know, you're gone. But Joe does, she takes the hat and she does the alterations that Mrs. Bell had requested, and she leaves it there, and that's her last day. And so she goes and she's looking for some work. She's basically turned away from everywhere. I think it was like 17 places that turned her down. Some of them slamming the door, and some of them also not so nice. And so finally Old Jen comes home, and Old Jen has been working for the Paynes, and Joe actually used to work for the Paynes. She had worked for the Paynes since she was a child, and then one day Mrs. Payne walked up to her while she was cleaning the banister, pointed to the door and said, go. And it broke Joe's heart, because that was, you know, aside from Old Jen and the Bells who they lived under, that was the only family that she had ever known. You know, despite the class difference. She had grown up with Etta Ray, who is, I understand, the head of I forgot what she called them. They weren't servants, they weren't maids. She called them something else. Etta Ray was the head of them. And then there was Noemi, who was her friend, and then there was Mrs. Payne, who was the lady of the house, and then Mr. Payne, who, the man of the house, of course, and then there were Carolyn and Merritt. And Carolyn and Merritt were the children. From what you gather at the beginning, when Joe is talking about Carolyn, as Old Jen is offering her this position to go back and work for the Paynes, her and Carolyn didn't have such a great relationship, and she doesn't really mention Merritt that much. So she tries to look for anything else, and she can't find it. But she goes to sleep in her corner of the basement, and she pops off the lid for the listening vent, and she hears the Paynes, or not the Paynes, she hears the Bells talking about how they've been told they're going to shut down their newspaper, which is the Focus. They're going to shut down the Focus if they don't hit 2,000 subscribers, because their competitor newspaper has recently started a column for agony ants, which is basically people writing in and complaining, and the agony ants responding. So Joe has an idea. She is going to start a column talking about the inequalities, not only of women, but of Chinese folk, of black folk, of alleged outliers of society. And so she starts writing this column. She decides to call herself Miss Sweetie, after her and Old Jen's beloved horse, Sweet Potato. And so she writes her first column, and she goes to the mean house and she shoves it through the mail slot. And she says she wants to remain anonymous. You know, if they want her to keep writing the columns, to print it in the newspaper, and she won't. So she accepts the position at the Paynes back, and she is devastated to find out that not only is she going to be working for the Paynes, but that her specific position is to be lady-in-waiting for Carolyn. So Carolyn is very vicious. You know, she's mean in a way that's uncalled for, but I imagine in those times was a normal thing, you know, for people in power to take out their hurts and their pains and their anger and their stresses on those that they had power over. And so you get this really dislike for Carolyn at the very start. She looks down on Jo. She's rude to her. Jo brings her breakfast from the kitchen. She immediately calls her stupid, tells her to take it back down and get her some sunny side up eggs. So Jo takes it back down and, you know, brings her eggs. And Mrs. Payne has been very, very specific that Jo is not to leave Carolyn's side while they are out. She's not to visit alone. She's not to go out alone. Jo's joy in this is that she gets to ride Sweet Potato again, and she's riding with Carolyn daily. And the very first day, Carolyn loses her handkerchief. She demands Jo go back and get her handkerchief. Jo dismounts her horse at a watering trough, and Carolyn is there with her horse at the watering trough, and Jo goes to go retrieve the handkerchief, and guess who's not there when she comes back? So she is up and down the streets running, like looking for Carolyn. You know, she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I failed the first day. I can't believe I fell for that. And, you know, at this point, she's livid. But she has to find her because, I mean, this is her job. She's been turned away from several different places. And this is really the only thing that she has to hope for. And so she finally sees Carolyn's horse in a cemetery. And she's approaching the horse, and she starts hearing voices and murmurs from inside one of the tombs or catacombs. She realizes that Carolyn is in there with Mr. Q, who is betrothed, well, he's engaged to Miss Salt. Melanie Salt, something. Her last name is Salt. Or Saltwater or Saltweather, but they call her Salt. And so she's just kind of like, you know, well, it's not my business, but, you know, poor Miss Salt. And she backs away, and she goes and she rides Sweet Potato, and she's racing Sweet Potato through a field, and then she realizes that somebody's beside her on their own horse racing her, and she turns and she looks, and it's Merritt. Now, Merritt is Carolyn's brother. He knows that she's supposed to be watching Carolyn, and so he, you know, they finish their race mainly because Jo is concerned that Merritt's going to go tell Mrs. Payne that she wasn't with Carolyn. And so they have a conversation, and you get the feeling that, you know, there was a bond there when they were children. You know, because the classes, the prejudices that adults have don't necessarily manifest themselves in children. And so she recognizes that there's a problem with the way that they're connecting, and she turns and she goes away, and she goes and finds Carolyn. She kind of makes some snarky remarks to Carolyn about how she's seeing an engaged man, and Carolyn just kind of brushes her off. And it eventually comes to the point where Jo's like, look, you're not going to treat me the way that you're treating me, or I'm going to tell Mrs. Payne what you're doing. And so it becomes really difficult for Carolyn to hold her tongue. So old Jim gets sicker. And then in the basement, Jo finds a letter that says, "Dear Shane, I'm sorry," and then it's signed E. And there's old trinkets. There's a top to a bottle. I think it was a perfume bottle that she finds in an old box. There's a suit that she assumes is old Jen making her something to wear for her wedding, because old Jen has been telling her that, you know, she needs to find a man with a big nose to take care of her, maybe a Chinese man in Augusta. And I guess to old Jen, the big nose represents good fortune. And so there's a lot of those, you know, this represents good fortune, this represents good fortune in this book as well, which I really appreciated. And so there's mystery upon mystery, and there's so many secrets in so many different places that when you start getting towards the end and you realize that the person that Joe has been looking for has been so close this whole time, it's kind of unnerving. And you know, there's a villain. His name is Old Billy, or Billy, or something like that. And he has made a life of big, loud, colorful Billy who trades in secrets, and he will find your secret and he will trade it to the highest bidder unless you are the highest bidder. And Joe has a feeling that Billy knows who her family is, because old Jen is not actually her father. Joe has a run-in with somebody that she did not intend to reveal herself to, and that person leads her to Billy, and Billy is trying to hold something over her, and then Joe finds out something at the Payne's house and she leaves. But then Billy has his goon go and, the way that Billy puts it later, the goon was only supposed to scare old Jen. But old Jen, when Joe finds him in the barn, old Jen he's bloody. He is broken. His eye is possibly blinded. And but I mean, the way that Billy puts it, when his goon came back, old Jen had gotten him because he was bloody and scared. And so, you know, it was nice to read that part of it, you know, that the goon was scared. But when I'm trying not to give away the ending, because there's little things that I'm afraid if I tell you that they're going to give away the ending. But there's a horse race coming up. It's the great horse race in Atlanta, and I don't want to give anything away. It's so good. It's a very interesting, intricately woven, I imagine like a Chinese silk knot story, and the ending is sweet. There's a couple places in there where I was laugh out loud, and there was a couple places in there where I teared up. And it's a good read. I think that, you know, later on down the line, if I'm having a problem, you know, between the fantasy novels and the horror novels and the, you know, big supernatural thriller novels, you know, that I might pick up another Stacey Lee, because it was really enjoyable. So that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe below, and you have a wonderful day.